Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about really a major point of contention, but it actually makes sense. And the thing is, when you hear something like this and it comes from someone who does coach elite athletes, who does have a PhD in a field, who probably knows what they're talking about, it makes it a little bit different, doesn't it? And when the person provides examples of ultra elite coaches and athletes who essentially have been doing this for years without breaking it down this way, but that is what they are doing, which you guys see me doing with these box squats, it can be a bit of an epiphany. And I was first turned on to it with some stuff with Dr. Joel Seidman, and did some of that where I look at it and go, 90-degree squats with chains, and I don't know about some of this, even though I do some of that. Really, don't I? Yeah. So I listened to a whole debate he did with Christian Thibodeau, who I happen to like, and I don't necessarily agree with everything Christian says, but I like him nonetheless. Right? That's how these things work. We can disagree with someone on some points and still say, smart guy, a lot of experience, and I happen to like him as a person. Yeah, we're allowed to do that and still disagree with them. Amazing how that works. It's a good dude. I like him. He got in a debate with Dr. Joel, and they were discussing this, and it was the whole point about, from a practical hypertrophy perspective, there may not be any real benefit to taking movements beyond 90 degrees of joint angle. Right? What do we see right here? Box squat, 90-degree joint angle. Bam! Speed boxes. This is what I built my squat with, by the way. Guys are like, how do you have a 550, no sleeves, no wrap squat? This is what I built it with. And that's how I'm going to get to 600. And, he pointed it out and says, people want to argue about this and everything else, but then you have the perfect example. The West Side guys, they box squat to 90 degrees and produce world record level squatters. And then people jump in and say, well, that's only equipped. You seen any of those guys squat when they take the suits off? You do realize a lot of those guys can squat 700 and 800 pounds completely raw. Okay? Completely raw. I'm going to say they're doing pretty good. I'm going to say I don't care what your equipped squat is. Someone can call you a weak squatter when you can take the suit off, take the wraps off, and put 800 pounds on the barbell and still squat it raw. You're strong. You are ultra elite strong, irrespective of what weight class you are in at that point. Okay, that's strong. And that's how they train. So I train. We see the same thing. Look at the floor pressing. It's a 90-degree movement. Builds big chest. Builds a big bench too. It can. You look at these things, and it's kind of what he's pointed out. He goes from his understanding, and he went into quite a bit of technical jargon, some of which I can't fully follow. I'll be the first to admit that. I can follow a fair amount of it. I've had enough A&P. I've had some anatomy and physiology. I mean, not his level. But he was discussing the way this works as far as muscle fibers go. And yeah, as long as you have really good contraction at the 90-degree point, that's really where most muscles tend to have the majority of muscle fibers available. Right? And when we go beyond that, in some cases, we may not be recruiting as many fibers. So what do you see happen? We've even seen guys like starting strength guys. You don't always get everything right. I pointed out, look, we just find our people generally get stronger if we just have them squat just a parallel. We're looking at effective range of motion. What is the effective range of motion? How are we balancing range of motion with weight on the bar? And that's what they find best results at. And it kind of comes back to what he's saying. When he takes people just to a 90-degree squat, most of his athletes, they get stronger faster, they gain muscle faster, and it works for practical people. It's a good point. We could set that with box squats, because we could argue, well, it might be hard to squat to exactly 90 degrees, so we can set a box squat there. Okay. It brings into question if there is any real hypertrophic advantage to going beyond that. There could be. And you guys will even see me do some of these floor skull crushers later. And I've even seen Nippard, and I don't particularly care for Nippard. Doesn't mean he doesn't get some stuff right. again, let's come back over to that point I made with Christian Thibodeau. I can generally not particularly like someone. We should all be able to do this, guys. Every one of us. You know, saying, I don't particularly care for this guy, but he still gets some stuff right. Some of his info is pretty good. See how that works? It's called being unbiased. Called being unbiased. You say, I don't particularly hold a favorable view of some of his training and ideas. But he still gets some stuff right and still has some pretty good info. And he even talked about that with the floor skull crusher. The data seems to indicate it's pretty good. And he's like, and I usually find it, I get good tricep development out of it. Technically a partial, but isn't it more or less taking the joint to 90 degrees? It's taking you to 90 degrees of elbow flexion, right? We're kind of falling back over to that point, aren't we? And it's not saying you can't go deeper. It's not what I'm saying at all, because we all are going to on a lot of exercises. There are plenty of exercises in which it's not safe to stop short. That's what I would tell people right now. They start talking about bench pressing. Well, what about benching to 90 degrees? You better be doing a floor press or a board press. You don't want to do that with a barbell just in the air. I'm going to recommend it. I'll tell you that's dangerous. It's dangerous and it's stupid. We have board presses for a reason. It's the same thing. Can we set that up and do that? Yes, we can. Right, for you it might be a one board, might be a two board, whatever. You could do that if you wanted. You could rep out a board work. A lot of guys have a lot of success doing that, don't they? Pretty jacked. It raises that interesting point of if we're chasing practical size, like just good practical athletic performance, setting up exercises where you take things to a 90 degree can make a lot of sense. You might have to stack pads or mats or blocks or things to get it exactly there. But we have those tools available, right? Most of us who have decent gyms, we have pads and mats. Well, we can set boxes whatever height we want. We can do deficit deadlifts at whatever height we want. Well, you can set your snatch grip deadlift to get deeper if you need to, right? This stuff, we can do board presses. You can get a bench block like I could do. You can set your bench up to that if you wanted. Of course you can. We can do all these movements that way. We can adjust everything if we wanted to. If we're just trying to get big, it works. It's going to give you all the available motor units. It's kind of what he pointed out. As far as any of that stuff goes, that's where usually where you have the most muscle fibers available tends to be at about 90 degrees of joint angle. And that's a good position to move from. Not saying exclusively, but it's a general guideline. It's fine. We can set aside some of this ambiguity of what is full range of motion and say, okay, well this works. Now what about carryover? It's kind of what they pointed out too. Well, the west side guys always find doesn't matter. So what if we squat an inch above? We can get that last bit anyways. Why? Because the science shows that. That's not hypothetical. That's not bro science. The amount of degrees of carryover that we get in performance on strength is pretty well understood. We know how joint angle specificity and carryover works. It's not misunderstood. It's well documented in the strength and conditioning scientific literature. Yeah, of course you can get that extra inch. You can get that extra inch when you need to. It'll be there. Right? As long as you're strong, you don't tear something because you got a muscle weakness. So it's just an interesting concept to think about. So, it just throws kind of a wrench in the idea, because we know that idea is wrong, that, well, longer range of motion generally produces more hypertrophy. Go back to that word generally, except that we find cases where it doesn't. And coaches find places where it doesn't. We see exercises that don't even activate it ideally. There's exceptions, and here's what it comes down to. Maybe these exceptions exist because we could look at better rules and say, okay, taking a movement to 90 degrees, if it is safe and you have a consistent way to do it, will probably produce maximum hypertrophy. Now, you can't do that on every exercise, though, can you? But if you can, there doesn't seem to be any negatives to hypertrophy. You're not losing anything because you're not trying to get that next 15 degrees of joint flexion, right? Not really a big deal. There can be some sport-specific reasons to go beyond, but we're talking about specificity of training, not general size and strength at that point. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.